He was on the trail in Iowa not long ago, but he's no politician. He's looking for diamonds.
A 6-year-old cutting through alleys to dodge bullies doesn't sound like the origin story of a career built on antiques and reality television, but that's exactly where Mike Wolfe's story begins. Not in a classroom, not with a mentor pointing the way, just a kid, a shortcut, and a rusted banana seat bicycle tangled in someone else's weeds behind a neighbor's house in Bettendorf, Iowa. He pulled it out, pumped the tires, cleaned it up, and sold it for $5. Most people would file that under luck and move on. Wolfe filed it under direction. That single afternoon ignited something that 5 decades of backroad travel, television fame, bitter friendship, personal loss, and public backlash haven't come close to extinguishing. And the story of how a discarded bicycle turned into one of the longest-running antique hunting programs in the history of cable television, complete with a co-host feud, a multi-million-dollar divorce, accusations of staged fines, and a small town that can't decide whether he saved it or ruined it, is more layered than anything the cameras ever showed. Growing up in Bettendorf, Iowa, Wolfe was raised by his mother, Rita, alongside siblings Beth and Robbie. Money always scarce, and opportunity never handed to anyone. Tight budgets have a way of sharpening certain minds, and what they sharpened in Wolfe was an eye for value that other people walked right past, while other kids chased trophies. He dragged broken furniture out of garages, studied the bones of objects people had given up on, and learned through his hands what no classroom was teaching him about collecting, history, and what things are actually worth when you bother to look. The family garage became his workshop. Restoration became his first real language. At 13, he quietly bought his first motorcycle without telling his mother, an early sign that the instinct driving him wasn't waiting for permission. That same defiant quality, the impulse to go toward the thing nobody else is going toward, became the engine of every business decision that followed. A bicycle shop came first. Antiques gradually took over everything, and by 2000, that obsession had a physical address. Antique Archaeology opened in LeClaire, Iowa, inside a former 1947 Chevy dealership, a shop filled with finds from his road travels and built on the idea that forgotten objects carry stories worth saving. From day one, it was never just retail. It was a position on what gets thrown away and what deserves to survive. For a full decade before any cameras arrived, Wolfe worked those back roads quietly, breathing in the dust of forgotten barns and pulling pieces of American history out of places nobody else thought to search. He filmed his pics himself, recorded the stories behind each object, and spent 5 consecutive years pitching the concept to television networks who kept saying no. 5 years, and he kept arriving at the next meeting anyway. The History Channel said yes in 2009, and when American Pickers premiered on January 18, 2010, the first episode drew 3.1 million viewers, the network's strongest debut since Ice Road Truckers. Within weeks, that number climbed to nearly 4 million, and reality television had a new kind of show on its hands, one where the subject wasn't manufactured drama between contestants, but the actual past, preserved in barns and backyards across the country. Frank Fritz was the reason so much of it worked. Their friendship stretched back to middle school, grounded in shared collecting instincts and the shared absence of fathers in their lives. And when Wolfe needed a co-host for the show, Fritz was never really a question. Antique toys, oil cans, offbeat Americana. Fritz's taste ran toward the quirky and unexpected, and his presence on camera was the kind that doesn't get produced in a casting session. Collectors who'd never let a stranger through their front door opened up for him. Stories that would have stayed buried came out in those conversations, and what emerged was the human warmth that separated American Pickers from every other treasure hunting program on television at that time. It didn't look like a production. It looked like 2 men doing exactly what they would have been doing on a Tuesday regardless, with someone happening to film it. None of that warmth survived what came next. By 2020, Fritz had vanished from American Pickers without public explanation, and when Wolfe addressed it through an Instagram post in July 2021, Fritz's response landed quickly and without softening. He called Wolfe's written tribute bulls. What Fritz told reporters was more direct. They hadn't spoken in 2 years, and through his entire back surgery recovery in 2020, Wolfe never once picked up the phone. Fritz put it plainly to interviewers. He knew my back was messed up, but he didn't call me up and ask how I was doing. 40 years of friendship had folded into silence, and Fritz had no interest in making that easier to hear for anyone watching. The grievance ran deeper than a missed phone call. Fritz described the show as having tilted toward Wolfe 1,000% over the years. The dynamic reduced to a frontman and his supporting act, and health problems made the position harder to fight from. Crohn's disease had drained him for years, and a dependency on painkillers, which took hold after his 2020 back surgery, brought him into conflict with the network's strict drug screening policies. Fritz reportedly failed those screenings, giving producers grounds to keep him off the road that went beyond any personal tension between him and Wolfe. He maintained throughout that he hadn't quit. He'd been fired, and that position hardened when Wolfe's brother Robbie began filling more screen time, feeding Fritz's belief that the replacement had been arranged before the departure was ever announced. Then the story stopped being about television entirely. Fritz suffered a severe stroke in July 2022 that left him partially paralyzed and bedridden, and he never recovered. At 60 years old on September 30th, 2024, Frank Fritz passed away. What caught many people off guard was that Wolfe was there. The two had quietly reconnected in May 2023, setting aside the public bitterness for something more private. And when the end came, Wolfe was reportedly holding his hand. The tribute posted afterward described Fritz as a dreamer who was just as sensitive as he was funny, words that carried a different weight given everything that had passed between them, but words that pointed towards something genuine underneath all the noise. The show's authenticity had been contested long before any of that. The 2016 episode known as Shelby in the Barn followed Wolfe and a colleague through Alabama in search of a Chevy neon sign, and what they supposedly stumbled onto instead was a 1967 Shelby Mustang GT500 sitting untouched for over 40 years. The internet responded immediately and skeptically, and the numbers sharpened the argument. Even in rough condition, a car like that carried a market value of around $75,000, with restoration expenses that could exceed $100,000 more. Fans across forums and social media argued that production teams had scouted the location in advance, prearranged the discovery, and engineered the dramatic buildup around an item that was never genuinely unexpected. The car's owner ultimately refused to sell, citing sentimental value, which some viewers accepted as authentic, and others read as scripted tension designed to close the episode on unresolved drama. That episode remains the most debated find in the show's entire run, and it planted a question about reality television and antique hunting that the show never fully answered. The retail complaints came from a different direction entirely. A 2022 Better Business Bureau filing came from a customer who placed an order through the Antique Archaeology website, received a purchase confirmation, and then got a silent refund with no explanation attached. The store's response pointed to a technical glitch that had allowed two buyers to purchase the same item within hours of each other before the inventory system could update. A plausible explanation that some customers accepted and others didn't. What the incident reopened were older frustrations about the store's pricing. Vintage signs selling for $900, branded socks at $18, a retail operation generating around $900,000 annually, while critics noted the gap between barn prices and storefront prices. For fans who valued the show's ethos of finding hidden worth in overlooked places, paying $900 for a sign felt like a particular kind of irony. His marriage to Jodie Faith, which began in 2012, carried serious weight through this same stretch of years. Her 2013 diagnosis of stage 2 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, a cancer of the lymphatic system, brought years of treatment and the kind of sustained pressure that reshapes everything around it, and she was declared cancer-free in 2020. The marriage didn't survive that year. Separation came in June 2020, finalized by December 2021 under irreconcilable differences, and the settlement was substantial. Jodie received over $5.8 million in cash, properties in Tennessee and North Carolina, royalties from American Pickers, and $2,100 a month in child support. Primary custody of their daughter Charlie went to Jodie, though Wolfe has remained a consistent presence in Charlie's life and posts openly about their time together, signaling a commitment to fatherhood that his demanding schedule hasn't managed to override. Columbia, Tennessee became the most contested chapter of his public life outside of the Fritz feud. The 2012 purchase of a historic home there for $700,000 was followed by more than $1 million in restoration work, and then additional properties, a vacation rental under the Two Lanes brand, a bike shop, a growing footprint in a small town that hadn't extended a formal invitation to that level of outside investment. Plans surfaced for a nearly $983 million six-story condo development, and that number sharpened an argument that had been building since his first purchase. Longtime residents who worried about rising property values and changing community identity found themselves on one side of a debate about gentrification and historic preservation, while Wolfe positioned his involvement as economic revitalization. The gap between those two readings has never closed, and the tension it produced reflects a question that follows money into small towns everywhere. When does outside investment stop serving the people already there? His motorcycle collection exists in a quieter register than any of that noise. Over 130 antique motorcycles gathered over decades, including a 1913 Indian and a 1934 Harley-Davidson VL, all of them preserved in their original condition, with the scratches, dents, and rust left exactly where time deposited them. Wolfe's philosophy on restoration is specific and consistent. Stripping a vintage motorcycle back to showroom condition erases the evidence of its actual life, and that evidence is the entire point of preserving it. Collectors who restore everything to mint condition are doing something he respects but doesn't share. In January 2025, 62 motorcycles from that collection went to auction in Las Vegas, not as an exit from the passion, but as a narrowing of it, a choice to concentrate on specific eras of early motorized transportation and open access to machines that other collectors would otherwise never encounter. February 2025 brought the Nashville Antique Archaeology location to a sudden close after a gas leak caused by nearby construction disrupted operations, and as weeks passed without a confirmed reopening date, the absence generated questions that a gas leak explanation alone couldn't quiet. American pickers had been losing audience numbers in recent seasons. Physical retail across the country was under pressure, and the combination fed speculation that the closure carried more significance than a construction accident. No official statement pointed toward anything beyond a temporary disruption, but the volume of questions arriving on social media reflected how much weight the show and everything built around it still carries for the people who watched it find its footing back in 2010. Filming resumed in South Carolina in early 2025, with producers inviting locals to bring their collections and stories forward, a deliberate effort to inject fresh energy into a program that had been running for 15 years. Wolfe turned 60 on November 6, 2024, and in the months surrounding that birthday spoke about narrowing his focus, about the small circle of people around him mattering more than the constant movement, about choosing depth over volume. And yet the road still pulls at him the way it always has. From a $5 bicycle pulled out of a neighbor's weeds to 15 seasons of television, a motorcycle collection that spans the earliest decades of the industry, a preservation mission that has drawn as much criticism as praise, and a friendship that ended in death after nearly ending in silence, Mike Wolfe has never fit cleanly into a single story. What has remained constant, from that alley in Bettendorf onward, is the belief that the things people discard still have something left to say, and the willingness to keep showing up to hear it.